Hi, Manuel. Welcome to bite-sized episode of PyCon. And I would like you in the beginning to just quickly introduce yourself before we start.
Hi, Mansi. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I am a aspiring scientist. I've been aspiring to be a scientist for 30 years now, so I'm quite old, I suppose. I am also a failed medical student who didn't get into medicine. And so the second best thing was to do biomedical sciences. And while I was doing my undergrad, I had this, worm, the research worm bit me. And suddenly I became obsessed with knowledge, with understanding the world I'm part of, understanding nature. I became a bookworm, and I've been obsessed with science since then. I did very poorly at the beginning as a biologist. I got all my samples contaminated, but then I was fascinated with data, and it was the sort of the first internet years, and I wanted to make sense of the things that were happening, the excitement of the Human Genome Project, big data for the first time in the sort of digital transformation of health. And that led me to do a PhD in bioinformatics at the University of Manchester. And that changed my life. So from being a mediocre scientist, suddenly I was doing something which was in very high demand, marrying computer science with biology was something very, very new and still very new. And I've been doing that for about 25 years now.
Wow, that is an impressive journey. It's very, how do I put it? It's a very realistic way how people also come into not only science, but also perceive what they want to do in future, right? You see that you miss a few paths, but whatever the path you end up being becomes so important that you're like, why did I even think of doing anything else in the beginning? So kind of impressed. But Manuel, I would love to start with your first story, is what pulled you into this world of genomics and health equity, because you're big on health equity and I love that.
Thank you. That's very generous of you. Again, I'm just aspiring health data equity scientist. So genomics in particular, I started as my postdoc years at the Sanger Institute in Cambridge, where I was headhunted to work for a database called Decipher, which became the sort of infrastructure of the sort of institution of genome sequencing across UK regional centers for pediatric purposes in UK and Ireland. So I was developing that as part of my postdoctoral years for 4 years. And then at the time, I realized that that wasn't just going to be for pediatrics, because we all have a genome. And I was trying to sort of push the boundaries of what is possible. And me and my family sequenced our genomes and putting on the internet for anyone to download. That at the time, sort of, I think we probably were the first family who put their genomes online. And that sort of developed a community where, crowdsourcing analysis of my family genomes. And, we even wrote a publication in 2015, which became very sort of successful within my field. And sort of tinkering with open access data sets from genomics data sets. One of the things I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice to sort of scrape all of the data that is, there are also crazy people like me who are also putting their genomes. So I found a number of resources that had open access voluntary DNA genotypes from people who just wanted to give their data for science. So we managed to gather around 3,000. And then I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we just let's interpolate what their likely ancestry is. We're talking 2017, 2016. And actually 95% were of European ancestry in 2017. And I thought that was even before we had the current awareness that we have of data access. And I thought this can't be right. You know, this is telling me, you know, first of all, who is having access to these data sets? I mean, they come from the company called 23andMe, which you might have heard of. They come from, so these are the people who are paying. These are the people who are accessing. These are the people who are getting educated for these tests. So where is the rest of the world? So that was when I thought, you know, this is not right, and I don't like this.
That's a fair point, because 23andMe was also recently bought by Regron, right? I don't know in the end, because there was a big discussion about this as well, regarding the genomes of data. But one thing I've also seen in general is, I mean, it is just open and accessible in certain countries, like in the Caucasian world, because also all of these tests are expensive, right? Not everyone in the world can afford it. And this becomes also one of the biggest obstacles from my perspective why there's underrepresentation. Have you also seen something similar, or would you shed some light on how do you see the
Well,
obstacles?
so obviously the cost is a big issue, but there are many other issues. Some companies simply don't ship to the global south. They just don't sell these kind of things there. And if you are in the global south, let's say Peru, where I was there recently, and I'm going again in a couple of weeks' time, well, reagents cost double. And if you want to have machines there, they cost more expensive. They have to bring the equipment. So what happens is that if you actually want to do this kind of analysis, you have to ship them outside. You have to send them somewhere else. And you become completely disempowered by that, because you are basically giving your data, giving your samples. Then somebody maybe in Germany could do the analysis, whatever, but they have the power and the control, not them. And then, you know, so that is a massive, massive issue in terms of injustice, because it's not just the fact that it's more expensive. It's not just the fact that markets are more difficult there. It's also the fact that people are disempowered to do those kind of analysis locally. So my big fight is that whenever possible, we should always aim at, whenever we do this kind of analysis, that they should be done locally, because, you know, you're missing an opportunity to train people locally. You're missing an opportunity to develop the economy locally, and you are disempowering yourself. So there's a huge number of issues that I've come across, which are part of my fight.
That's a good point. I mean, and also talking about Peru, because you are very much passionate about Latin America. We have discussed this also previously. What specifically would you do, let's put it this way, or is in your goal slash your vision that would bridge this gap in Latin America?
So I'm passionate, full stop. Yeah, hot-blooded Spaniard. So, but I'm also quite opportunistic. And what I've seen throughout the years is that I'm based in the UK. The UK is a leading nation in terms of implementation of genomics. Full stop. Technologies are developed here. Implementations are first done here. So the UK in many ways is leading the way globally. And historically, the UK has links with Africa, with, South Asia and so on, but they don't have links with Latin America. What that happens is that funding agencies based in the UK, such as the Wellcome Trust, they're going to have very good capacity building programs for Africa. They're going to have very good connections, very good networks with some of the historical sort of colonies. But that doesn't happen with Latin America because historically they aren't the same, they don't speak the same language. But I'm based in the UK, my mother tongue is Spanish, and I'm at the sort of middle of everything that is happening here. And I saw a great opportunity for me to contribute by becoming a little bit like a bridge between the amazing technologies that are being developed here in the UK and the Spanish speaking world, who happen not to have a conference or events until I started the first one.
Yeah, that's the conference in Madrid was really eye-opening also for us, because it was quite impressive to see such a good community who come together to really make a difference. It really felt like a family. This is how I remember it was like a family coming together, and it's like, okay, what is the next step? How do we tackle this? This was also interesting. And recently, when I also went to Chile, I actually had the same issues there, where they said things just don't work in Latin America, what is actually approved by FDA, because people don't take into consideration the genomics part, that it's not going to match the Hispanic genomics or the Latin American genomics if it's going to be trained on a Caucasian genomic, for example. And have you also, during your research period, like within your 30 years, have you seen how missing this diversity in data sets harms or missed opportunities for certain communities? Could
All the
not
time.
all the time.
All the time.
This
I
is
mean, for instance, the chip arrays that are currently being sold for anyone to perform genetic tests, which is the cheapest alternative that currently exists to sort of doing genetic analysis. They're mostly based on European markers. What that means is that a lot of the variation that you observe in those standards don't represent very well the richness, the important markers for non-Europeans. We also see many examples in pharmacogenomics, that is the sort of gene drug reactions. So anytime you take a pill, let's say codeine, so it's a sort of painkiller. As it happens, 30% of the population in Ethiopia carry a massive mutation that makes them ultra rapid metabolizers, which means that if you have the normal dosage, you can get a toxic shock. You could even go into respiratory shock. So what happens is that because it's so prevalent in Ethiopia, the Ethiopian government has banned codeine, which is, it's just a normal drug that we take it here. Another important drug, warfarin. It's the world biggest, most prescribed anticoagulant. Well, 1 in every 4 Africans have adverse drug reactions.
Yeah.
Because the normal dosage doesn't work properly, and they have such a varied genome that it's very difficult to really tailor the appropriate dosage a lot of the time. And since, it's very accessible and it's what people have access to, so 1 in 4 have adverse drug reactions. Now, that doesn't happen with Europeans because we have already algorithms that have been trained that are able to correctly predict very accurately whether an European is going to have, overdose or something like that. So, but if you are non-European, those algorithms don't work well. And I can go on and on with many examples like this.
I know. I actually also noticed the same thing when we went to India. It's crazy. All the FDA drugs, not all, but there were many drugs and many therapies. For example, radiation recommended therapies simply don't work because the dosages are too high for Indians and also Asians in general, because, and what interestingly, I mean, not a topic that we should dive in right now in depth, but it's when we take into consideration these clinical trials that happen for such drugs, they kind of group these people, and grouping all Asians together or all Hispanic Latin Americans together to lead to 0.3% is not really going to be representative of the global population. And this is a whole new topic, I know, but this is really mind-boggling how but obvious it is, but still.
I mean, it's very obvious, but I think the main issue, I mean, I'm scientists don't want this to happen.
No, of course not.
Pharmaceuticals don't want this to happen. People don't want this to happen. But the problem is that there isn't a clear business case that supports and that provides the appropriate cost benefit for being able to develop this. I mean, unless you have the appropriate financial backing and the return on investment, is not viable. And so the business case is not well developed, or it doesn't exist, or in the current capitalist system where we work, if we don't have that, then we can't develop. It's a lot more challenging.
That's true. That is very true. And I hope at some point this helps, and we are working towards it. It's one drop in the ocean at a time, I would say. But have you seen within your entire international collaborations during all these years any, let's say, institutions, companies doing a better job at trying to build and bridge this equity gap for healthcare?
I think that the predominance of health equity now is very strong. I think there have been huge amounts of movement towards improving diversity, especially in genomics. But I think, pretty much in all health areas. I think part of the issue is that we didn't know until now so well that this was a problem.
Yeah, that's true.
We didn't have the data.
It's very true.
But now we have the data to be able to identify the fact that this data doesn't work for a lot of the people. So I think there's a lot of awareness. I'm still surprised, though, that many mainstream initiatives don't have health equity at the core, at the center of what they do. And I can't envisage any kind of development in biomedical research that doesn't take this into account. And I've seen very, very good sort of inertias. For instance, the UK Biobank, which is severely biased towards British populations, right? Because it's the UK Biobank.
Yeah, fair point.
But they're really trying, and they're also hoping to, with new initiatives in the UK, such as Our Future Health, which aims to recruit 5 million people. That's 10% of the population in England, which is massive. And they're going to have genetics, and there's a strong drive to make it more diverse. So that movement, that sort of inertia and that momentum is already established. So that's something to celebrate.
That's
and I think, there's also the fact that, particularly in the UK and in Europe now, that people see this as something which is essential. I mean, there have been some issues on the other side of the Atlantic that don't help in bridging the gap. But I think within the scientific community, there's a very strong awareness that this is now a massive problem. So, and we need to sort of balance that with with real life impact things. So we can have enormous, wonderful discoveries, scientific progress, but actually, how do we develop tools, frameworks, deliverables that are actually having an impact on everyday life? I think that's where the gap exists now. So how do we bring these wonderful aspirations, these current projects, into actually benefiting people in the street? That's where
Mm-hmm.
we need to focus our attention now.
And how would you think the role of industry, especially if you take into consideration commercial industry, would help achieving you and this vision?
So we need to find operational models that are cost effective and that bring benefits and revenue, which are centered around populations that basically can pay very little or populations that are very small. I mean, we see that, for instance, with rare genetic disorders.
Mm-hmm.
You have, cohorts of n equals 1, right? So wouldn't it be nice to have that? That's essentially the same as cohorts where n equals 300 million, but actually when you, in terms of cost, equals 1. So perhaps we could imitate some of those
Mm-hmm.
innovative operational frameworks so that cash-strained populations can actually afford and access drugs, treatments, therapies.
That's very much true. I mean, one thing what I've also seen that is slowly upcoming, that as you correctly mentioned before, that people are starting to understand, people are starting to realize this, that why is the therapy not working for me, for example. And another thing that I think even industry is starting to notice is that with the globalization, one country doesn't equal to people of that country only. We are all moving with globalization. So there are, each country from my perspective has become diverse now. So I wouldn't, for example, say Germany is equals only Germans. There's so many different populations living together in harmony. That holds true for many countries. That diversity is, as we say, no longer optional, because no country can say we are only French or we are only German or anything. We are now like global population of people living together. So we need to kind of work together towards this. So let's put it this way. How would you envision a world where equitable medicine becomes a reality? What would be your vision for future?
My vision is that regardless of what you look like, where you are born, what type of socioeconomic status, that just for choices that you can't make, that you can't benefit from the advancements of science
Mm-hmm.
towards improving health. Now, what this means in practice is that on the one hand, recognize the differences, recognize that in everything we do, at the level of experimental design, at the ethics level, at the level of infrastructure development, that there are differences that need to be taken into account. And that means that if you're going to, particularly at the level of government initiatives, that, if you're going to invest on implementation of healthcare, some particular aspect, health equity must be at the center. So it has to be a coordination between, in a way, things that have already been done, the level of universities, education, at the level of policy, at the level of industry, markets,
Mhm.
at the level of government. So all it has to be a mosaic of different societal aspects working towards that direction. I mean, I can think of the COVID vaccine, right? We had
That
a
was amazing.
tremendous need. Suddenly, everyone was aligned towards that goal, and we produced a vaccine. You may or may not believe in the vaccine. You may not think that is something good. I personally, as a scientist, think that it saved many lives. That's not to say that some people may have died. One out of a million. But I still believe that that was a tremendous feat of human prowess.
Hmm.
And if we want, we can do it.
Yeah, no, very true. And as a quick point, because recently I also had a discussion about how COVID vaccine strategy or bringing it to the market really brought out this diversity aspect, because they could see that it didn't work to certain population. They tested it, tried to push it out globally, didn't work, had to recall, and people started, I think that's when I really started to see this health equity and why it doesn't work for everyone. Like COVID opened eyes on many levels from my perspective, and this was the health equity was really one of the major issues where people realized, okay, wait a minute, you actually have to test it on different people for it to work. But you're right. If we put our minds to it, I think we can achieve great things. I mean, this goes on many levels.
We need to solve the business case. I
Yeah.
think that's the priority, really.
Yeah. How to make pharma companies realize, or not just pharma companies, anyone, right? Because it starts from research as well. Why should someone get funded for this versus not? So, I mean, there are many business
How can
cases
we
for
make
this.
this into a profitable business
Exactly.
for many?
Let's hope we get there one day. And I think we will get.
Profitable, ethical, and ethical. Yeah.
What would be
Not
your
unethical.
ethics? As a scientist, what do you think is ethics worth for you?
So I am a technologist. So I have a PhD in computer science, and I'm a sort of data scientist. And I believe that there's too much emphasis on tools, on technology, and we don't spend enough time thinking about this ethical, legal, social implications of. That's not to say we do it, right, because we have to do it,
Yeah, that's true.
but especially in some parts of Silicon Valley, you have technologies developing things so fast that is, they escaped the, I guess, the velocity at which they can, by the time they've made decisions, they're already onto something else. And so the pace at which technology is accelerating, and our ability to have that development within a context that is ethically available and accessible needs to have a little bit more thinking. I'm not opposed to technology advancement, and to be honest, I have a serious reservation about this reputation that Europe has, it's hyper regulatory and all of that, which I think, I'm not sure if that's happening, but even if it's not happening, this is certainly damaging our reputation as an innovative hub. And I don't want that to happen. But I think we need to think a lot more about not the utopia, abundance for everyone, everything, everywhere. No, 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 no. We need to think more about the faces of the people we are trying to serve.
Yeah.
Their thinking, their relationships, their, And that can only be achieved if we have diversity.
Yeah.
If it's not only 20 somethings white male people developing code from an air conditioning office somewhere in Palo Alto.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was very nicely put. One takeaway message I took from the Spanish conference we were at was every data point has a face behind it. And that resonates on so many levels that it kind of opened people's eye. Like, it's not just data, you're actually working with people for the people. We need to understand you're working for the people. It's not about the next achievement, it's actually helping the population. And this is a good message that you send. So thank you very much for that. I would say we had a great talk and I had really wonderful time talking to you. Thank you so much for your time and thank you for being part of Biteside. Until next time. Thanks, Manuel.
Goodbye.